style of whisky I enjoy drinking. My father-in-law, Max, was a canny old Scot that we used to enjoy fishing together, and he enjoyed his malt and introduced me to malt. And so when we talked about making whisky, we realised that for us to be competitive in the world market, I mean, there's no way we were going to be able to compete on volume. It would have to be on a quality product. The what people call Scotch or a blended whisky, that is a volume product. Volume.
Is Scotch blended, is it?
Scotch is blended.
I see.
So they make a grain spirit in a device called a continuous still, and they churn out large volumes of high-strength grain spirit. They leave that in a barrel for 3 years, but to make it drinkable, they add a certain amount of malt whisky. That adding of the malt whisky is what enables it to be called a blend. You're blending malt with grain.
I see. So you went with barley. The primary ingredient is barley then, is it? And water, presumably?
It is. It can only be made from malted barley, yeast and water. And when we started, we knew Tasmania was capable of growing good barley. The reputation of the two big beer makers down there was now well known throughout Australia and entering the world market. So we just thought to ourselves that Tasmania had good barley, obviously good water, good climate. Why not have a go at making whisky?
And when you say yeast, in what form is the yeast used?
We use a dry yeast, but we've chosen to use an ale yeast, a traditional yeast for making whisky, and we chose that because we can get a consistency of fermentation every single time. Some of the older distilleries would start off by developing their own yeast culture from a wet yeast and then keep that alive time and time again. But it does introduce some variables and things like that, so we decided to...
so you can stick with the more accuracy.
That's right.
Now, so you get it all together in a still, is that right?
Yeah, you once you've extracted that sugary liquid, we pitch the yeast into the sugary liquid in a vessel called an underback, and then we pump from there into a washback, which is a fermenter, like a wine fermenter. And this is where you start to be able to stamp our style of whisky on our whisky by the amount of time we can leave it in the washback.
Is the longer the better?
Certainly it is, unless you go too far, of course.
You can go
over the top. But a lot of the distilleries around the world are under so much pressure to make volume whisky that they tend to remove the wash or the whisky wash from the fermenters as soon as they can. We have the luxury of being small enough, and we're just able to do it, to leave it in the fermenter for a few more days. And we sort of watch very carefully, and that allows us to develop the flavour profiles that the judges are talking about in our whisky.
So it's a matter of days that it stays there?
For us, it's about 6 days, 6.5 days.
Okay, and then at the end of that, what happens?
Then it's an alcoholic product called whisky wash. It's about 8% alcohol. It's like a beer but without hops. That goes into the first of our 2 stills. And the first still is a wash still. And that's simply a matter of boiling that wash, removing all of the alcohol, or as much of the alcohol,
in other words.
Just distilling. So we get about a 98% return on that. That gives us now what we call a whisky low wine at about 25% alcohol. But at that stage, it's not drinkable.
One sip and you fall over.
Oh, well, it's just... Well, it's only, that's 25%, it's not very strong, but it is very oily at that stage. And so we need to refine it to produce what we know to be a high-quality malt whisky by putting that in a spirit still, a second still, and we charge the still with the low wines together with the first cut and the last cut of the previous run. And this is where the passion and the art comes into making whisky, because now our distillers have to sit there and when we decide by sight, by smell and by taste when we do our cuts, the first cut to remove the lower, unpleasant, nasty alcohols, and then the second cut, which is the most important one, during the middle of the run we collect what is the lovely honey sweet heart of the spirit. Towards the end of the run, you start to get some unpleasant elements coming through. They're quite safe but unpleasant, and this is where, as distillers, we have to sit there and...
So you're using your taste, are you?
Taste and sight and smell.
Really?
And if I'm there, we usually argue about it.
They say, leave it a bit longer, Bill, and you say, no.
That's it. We go through that every single run, so again, we can put our stamp of... If we're using peat from our Highland peat bog, the more peat smoked malt we use, the longer we have to let the run go through.
Where does peat come into this story?
Peat is traditionally used in Scotland when you've allowed your malt